So my first two degrees were in environmental and town planning, and I I suppose I wasn't really interested in town planning per se. It was a little bit too sort of structured for me. So I ended up moving and being interested in recreational planning, particularly protected area management, and then probably what people were doing in those environments was always interesting for me. So I was involved with the Franklin Dam protests to block the Franklin, and so leisure was a part of that interest, that recreation, leisure, outdoors. And so I did my master's thesis on outdoor education and recreation, and that's probably how I got into leisure. And I was also personally always really interested in, when you play sport or do all those leisure activities, why couldn't you make a living doing that instead of having to work in an office? So leisure always interested me like that. About, I wanted to be able to do something for work that was like my leisure. So that's how I got interested. Taxi service for my children at the moment, but I probably swim. So in the ocean pools, I do that most mornings. A little bit of bike riding, a bit too much movie watching. I love movies, and probably gardening, like herb garden, veggie garden, and a little bit of travelling. So not a big traveller, but yeah, a little bit of travelling. Yeah. Mainly to national parks to do walking. Probably visits to national parks. So when I was first an academic, to the Redwoods National Park in America, in California, and then probably to Yosemite National Park, and then in Europe to some of the Dutch national parks, and a trip to the Guggenheim in Bilbao for World Leisure when it was there a long time ago. So just probably just one-off events, but mainly outdoor experiences where I'm either walking or maybe rafting. So. Yeah, I think unfortunately the trend in Australia, particularly for adolescents, has been computer games and computer, so electronic media has really big influence of it. And so there's a lot less outdoor activity. And in Sydney, with the medium density, more families moving into apartments and into two-bedroom apartments, moving away from quarter-acre block, there's been a real decline in participation in outdoor sports and outdoor activities. So in Sydney, I think that's particularly noticeable. So up a bit, yeah. Yeah, I think that's unfortunate. And then in Sydney itself, probably the main tourist destinations like Manly, Bondi, and that have been a bit overrun, over tourism. So more people coming from overseas to visit. So I think local people are starting to look for other destinations. Other places to have their leisure. So you tend to stay away from the beaches in summer a bit because they're just too crowded. So they're the ones that I've noticed mainly. Again, national parks and yeah, visitation to Indigenous culture. Those two are probably the main, and they look like they're two of the main drivers for people to come here. So those natural environments in Australia and the Indigenous flora and fauna and Indigenous culture, I think, would be the main ones. In Australia specifically, again, I think getting this generation away from too much computer, electronic media-based leisure. I think that it's become a huge part of their leisure focus. So even starting with getting them off mobile phones when they're driving, but in a more serious way, I think that staying indoors in an environment like this and getting them interested in outdoor activities across sport, but across leisure activities. I think it's really important. I think we need to push a lot more to make sure this next generation is participating in that at a younger age. Yeah. Yeah, probably a better understanding of how we form identity through our leisure. I think that we've relied on psychology and social psychology particularly to analyse our leisure, and I don't think they do it very well. Like, I think that the original Csikszentmihalyi and Seppo Isohola's work are out of date. I think we need to move into better models, better theory for identity formation and dealing with consumer culture and urban political economies and how does consumer culture affect identity in neoliberal societies. I think that leisure professionals and leisure academics need to look more seriously at that. I think, again, Robert Stebbins' work on serious leisure has been a really good into that, but we've got to go further. Particularly social psychology, we've got to start to question some of the fundamentals of where that's at and move on. So yeah, that notion of leisure and identity, we need to really look at better theoretical models and better practice. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, in Australia, we don't have any more leisure studies schools. I think there will be a resurgence when the economy picks up again. But yeah, just to convince government that it's a really important part of our lives. And that's a difficult thing. You're seeing less and less money available for research grants. You're seeing less and less attention to that area. And again, with it not being a part of academic study anymore, I think that we really need to sort of start to look at how do we revitalise that as an area of study in Australia, yeah, and internationally to a degree, yeah. Yeah, I think probably two main elements. Volunteer tourism in those earlier years was very much run by community-based groups, NGOs, international NGOs, and was really based around a focus on the community and what those communities wanted to do in their communities through volunteers coming into those communities. So I think now it's been commercialised, commodified, and the focus now is on profit. So a lot of these companies now that have come in are looking at how much money they can make, and so they're asset stripping those companies and NGOs, taking over those smaller companies and starting to run programs that really aren't community focused, in fact. And so what they're doing is cheaper programs, and so they can make a higher profit. So things like when they used to send English teachers with volunteers to teach English, and the volunteers would then just assist. Now they don't send the English teachers, they save on paying their salary, and they just send the volunteers to teach English. So yeah, so concerns there. And I think the other recent one is particularly that sort of neoliberalist approach of accusing sort of that sort of volunteer, particularly women that are volunteering, of the white Barbie saviour complex, which is that these young women are going to save the world by going to volunteer. And that's been a focus of the critique of volunteer tourism. And I think that that's a real male critique, and there's a range of authors academically and a range of people in government that are critiquing that, when it's often for young women a real opportunity to participate at that international level in an environment that opens up the future and their eyes to what's available. I think that's quite sad. I think we should be critiquing venture capital and the way capitalist society and neoliberalism is taking over volunteer tourism, and these people are making huge amounts of money out of the altruism of those volunteers, rather than accusing individual volunteers of taking advantage of cultures in developing countries. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that leisure in the sense of people are taking that opportunity to expand their experiences of the world. At the same time, there's that little bit of altruism involved with that, and moving away from that sort of model of hedonism in Western culture. Leisure has to be for your sort of benefit, sun, sex and tourism sort of approaches. So I think that, I think as an altruistic form of leisure, there is a component of that. Obviously, there's other elements there of personal development and things like that. So yes, I think volunteer tourism is really a good example of that movement away and that challenge to that hedonistic-based leisure to a more altruistic form of leisure, and only as a part of a mix. But I think something we should pay attention to, and I think it's really important to encourage that. Yeah, I think for me, in my area of expertise, China's discovered their natural environments and ecotourism. I think that, from the panda bears to and they haven't done that as much previously. I think they haven't realised, sure, the Great Wall of China and things like that, the cultural aspects, but not the natural environment. And I think that the sustainability has become a bigger issue for China, and things like the destruction of environments in China in the last 20 years has been huge, in building and dam projects and things like that. And they're just starting to realise the value of a lot of their natural environments for tourism and even for their local population. So I think they're looking at improving that, and I think they realise the value of a lot of their environments, like through World Heritage listing and through encouraging the retention of those environments. So for me, that area. And the other thing is the electronic media, obviously, is just exploding in China. And so as a means of communication, they're discovering how they can use that in leisure and tourism. And again, they'll probably suffer some of the same problems we have with our adolescent teenagers of the overuse of electronic media. But I think they're the areas that the growth of leisure in China and tourism in China have moved towards. I think leisure in the context of lifestyle, I think, has been commodified, particularly in neoliberal societies. And I think people are now expecting to buy their leisure. So historically, where we used to volunteer in Australia, or we used to maybe construct or build or knit, or all of those activities that created something, we're now purchasing. So we go to our shopping malls as a leisure activity, we go and buy. And I think that commodification is increasing, and I don't see that changing in the short term. I'm hoping it will in the future, and we've moved into that commodified leisure within our societies and moving away from all those alternate ways of constructing leisure. And I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem for our identities, and I think it's a problem for the future. And I don't know if there's a solution to that. I think neoliberal societies pushing really hard to make us consumers. And all of those things that we used to do that were more creative or different, we're losing a lot of those skills and that interest. So that's where I see it going, and I don't know if that's going to change. Essential. Yeah. If world leisure doesn't keep up that profile internationally, then we're just losing that attention to leisure as a focus of all societies of the planet. It's such an important part of our lives, and we're being convinced that it's not, that work environments are now the most important part of where we are and what we do, and the most important part of people's lives. And that's not the case. I mean, we've demonstrated that leisure is probably more important than work for most people in terms of their lifestyle and their quality of life. And we need to keep that focus on, and we need to be convincing governments and institutions and organisations of that. And we need to do more of that. And we need to keep leisure as a focus of research in our academic institutions and as a training ground in our institutions. And I really firmly believe we need to take it away from the business. Leisure and tourism should be moved out of business and into other areas of study like humanities and those sorts of areas, and health and things like that, because it's not going to survive in the business models. They're too focused on short-term benefits and short-term gain. I mean, biggest sort of professorial appointments is supply chain management. It's like we're moving right away from that idea of leisure, and so I really firmly believe we need to get it back into our educational institutions. So whether that will happen, I don't know, but I hope leisure will play a role in doing that. I just see, I see educationally we're cyclic. We tend to leisure's gone down and it will come back, and tourism is the same. So I just hope that we can maintain that knowledge base that we've created through all of these years of study and not lose that. And we're in danger of there being a generation of not being educated about leisure. And I think that that's a real concern, is that we don't keep it as a prominent part of the planet and a part of our culture, and we really need to think about that. So, and that would be it, yes. So we're recording this outside a building designed for the University of Technology Sydney, the business building, by the architect Frank Gehry, and this building has become one of the icons of Australian educational institutions, and you can see from the design of it that it's a little bit spectacular and very, very interesting. And in fact, it's become a tourist attraction in its own right in this precinct, and it's linked into a pedestrian network, which makes it even more appealing, because people can get from, say, Central Station, which is one of the major stations in Sydney, to it without having to cross any roads. So it's sort of it's a milestone, I suppose, in the development of education in Australia.